Thank you. And thanks so much for attending this presentation. And this is really exciting because you're the first audience to really be introduced to this new collection we have at Hopkins. So welcome to Play Lady Play, the games and toys of the women's suffrage movement. And as the intro mentioned, I'm the Outreach Librarian for Special Collections at Hopkins. So what's so fun about it is that I have the freedom to purchase new collections and create fun activities for students to engage in. And games are a big deal at Hopkins. We have a lot of gamers, and last year we had our very first vintage game night in our reading room, and it was a huge success. I mean, we even got graduate students to attend, which is saying something. And students had the opportunity to play with games and toys dating back to the early 1800s. So the real deal, not facsimiles, and it was just amazing. We even had a seance in the dark corner of the reading room where a bunch of students got together and did these very complicated arm movements and then used our Ouija board that we have for the 1920s. It was really like wild. Things were happening. The lights were flickering on and off. Probably someone was doing it, but I like to pretend it was a gremlin. But anyway, suffrage, right? So why is now the moment to talk about or to collect women's suffrage? Well, it's because 2020 is going to mark the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the amendment which gave the majority of women in America the right to vote. And at Hopkins, there was this great idea to create lots of programming in commemoration of this event, with the library being a focal point. And it was a great idea, a wonderful idea, but there was only one problem. We didn't have a suffrage collection. So we had a few random things here or there, but nothing that would provide research opportunities or the ability for us to exhibit anything or contribute meaningfully to the discussions. So I've been tasked with creating this collection. So professionally, for the past 2 years, I've been living and breathing suffrage, and my brain is just very 19th century at the moment. But one of the things that I love about exploring the suffrage movement in both America and England is the ephemera associated with it. It's a world of color. It's just a pageantry of items. These women activists in the early 20th century fully embraced consumerism in a way that activists in the 19th century did not. They were creating colorful buttons that you could wear. So this idea of portable protest, of wearing something on your clothing that linked you to a cause, it was a huge deal. They were making tons of buttons, even, of course, the evil anti-suffragists, such as Ruth Goldberg, who did not want women to vote, got into the fold. So by examining these buttons, you see the colors of the era, the pageantry, but also you can sense the slogans and the wordplay. So in this anti-suffrage button here, it says, "Don't let it suffer." There are all these slogans, all these puns around the term suffer because of suffrage. The biggest one is, "I'm a suffragette," instead of "I'm a suffragette." And this was often accompanied by images of men who, horrors of horrors, are forced to, parent their children. I know, asleep. I mean, it's just awful. Living. So in addition to these signs of portable protest, these buttons and these colorful books that look like movie posters, you also have a wide range of reading materials. You had journals that talked about militant strategies of the suffragists. You had women's groups creating cookbooks. And you had women political cartoonists, such as Lou Rogers, who were creating pro-suffrage political cartoons. And I love this one here. You have a man trying to blow out the torch of political freedom, and she's like, "What a chucklehead." So it's just like, who says feminists don't have senses of humor, right? They do, and how? So all this was going on, all this was happening. You could not avoid the women question in the early 20th century. And its most popular mode was through the postcard. And it was the postcard that made me really think about games and toys of the suffrage movement. Because the postcard was collected. It was like this early, collectible, right? Postcard series were created. This Uncle Sam suffragette, this emasculated Uncle Sam, this feminized Uncle Sam, was part of the Suffragette series, which is one of the most popular anti-suffrage postcard series of the age. People had to collect them all, like Pokemon, right? You had to collect all these cards. And you would then place them in albums. So these are meant not just to be used for fun messages, but to be collected, cherished, and traded. And you can see people using suffrage for all sorts of things, including holiday cards. You have Santa delivering votes for women. And I wanted to include this because this card was designed by the Just Government League, a Maryland suffrage movement whose founding member was Katherine Hepburn's aunt. So that's kind of like a fun fact there. But you also have, again, an anti-suffrage card. A mother's got the habit now. So linking women engaging in acts of activism as being akin to having a drug habit. It's dangerous, we don't want it. Although, I mean, I think she's pretty fun in her, pants and her sash and her cigar. She's out there living life, but, he doesn't think so. So we have these postcards as this major conduit of thought and visual culture. And of course, this is what led me, as I mentioned earlier, to this notion of games. Were there games that had a suffrage message or an anti-suffrage message? If so, who were creating them and who were they being marketed to? So let's try and figure this out. And by the way, these are my student employees. It's not a caught situation. I don't only associate with brown-haired people wearing eyeglasses and gray sweatshirts. This was just really, really, really strange. And I almost wore a gray sweatshirt today, and I was like, nope. Then they're gonna really think I'm a cloth leader. I am not. So one of the first board games for the suffrage movement is something called Pea Swift. Any idea what Pea Swift means at all? Have you ever heard of the Pankhursts? They were a major militant suffrage family in England. And Swift is meant to conjure up the image of the evil Prime Minister H.H. Asquith, who did not want women to vote, the enemy of all suffragists everywhere. So this is an advertisement for this game. It was in Votes for Women, which is a pro-suffrage magazine, of course, and the game was launched in 1909. And what I love about it is that they're making no bones about it at all. This is a propaganda game. It's a table game. It is meant to be not just a winter full of fun, but a veriously funny, eye-opening, and a means to convert your anti-suffrage friends, which I just really love. And it's one good way to help the cause. What I also like, too, is that it talks a little bit about who created it. This game was not created by women. Well, rather, it's the ingenious invention of one of the many men friends of the suffragist movement. And it brings the powerful element of Hoover into telling the service for the cause. So again, like this idea of allyship, it's not odd at all. These suffragists, they welcomed men into the fold. So let's take a look at this game here. And I actually have it out here for you to look at later. So here's Pea Swift, suffrage propaganda. So it's kind of like Chutes and Ladders. You have this like spiral kind of thing where each little image is numbered, and you have to go around the circle with the hope that you eventually get to Parliament, which is square 50. So it's meant to kind of take you through the day in the life of a militant suffragette. And what I love is the very first square, you're the lady in the home looking after baby. Although it looks like the baby's about to like crawl into a fireplace. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say. So it kind of starts with that stereotypical image of the angel in the house. But then things get fun and complicated. So what does the day in the life of a militant suffragette look like for this game? Awesome. You fly aeroplanes, right? You break windows around the cops and you just don't care. You have like impromptu happenings like, yeah, we're gonna meet at Trafalgar Square, woohoo, votes for women, right? Then you protest and you're like, man, those cops aren't gonna get me. And you know what, if they do get me, who cares? They can handcuff me, the stupid government, I don't care, I'm gonna protest. And while I'm in jail, I don't care, I'm gonna go on hunger strike, and I'm gonna graffiti the place. Are we downhearted? No, these suffragists were awesome. And then, like, while you're in jail, going on your hunger strike, and like being like Lady Graffiti, your friends are out and about, doing acts of sabotage. They're finding out where the anti-suffrage folks are, like, speaking, and they're coming out to the trap door on the stage, going, votes for women. We're not going to stop until we get our votes, right? And also, if you want to have this anti-police messaging, how brave I am fighting women. Again, kind of playing into like, the gender norms of the weak lady, but it was the Edwardian era, we can deal with it. And then, of course, make a donation today. You have to play via the honor code. So if you land in this particular square, you have to send a penny to the suffrage funds. Very important stuff. So this is what it kind of looks like in a sense in play. So it's kind of colorful and fun, and it's really engaging. I'm currently teaching a course at Hopkins for undergrads on the ephemera surrounding the suffrage movement. About half the students in my class are international, so they don't really have any sort of construct for women's history in America or Europe in general. And I could assign them tons of reading to get them to learn a little bit about it. In fact, I had. But nothing has been more effective than having students sit down and play this game. It's moved from being like a tool of propaganda, right, to being an educational tool, a perfect way to use games to enlighten people on a part of history that they may know nothing about. And so, wow, these students remember these actions. They now know about hunger strikes. They know about all of the things that women had to do to get the vote, that it wasn't a passive endeavor, that these were women who took lots of action to achieve their goals. So here we have one example of a board game, Pea Swift. In America, they focused on creating card games. And oftentimes, it would just be like a standard deck of cards. And this was created by the National Women's Suffrage Publishing Co. around 1912, so 3 years after the Pea Swift board game. And what I find rather interesting about this set of cards is that this was a publishing arm of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. And they were the conservative suffrage group. They were anti-gambling and anti-poker in particular, and yet they were selling decks of cards, right? But this is how they made it legally and A-OK. They had instructions but just for bridge, because bridge was an acceptable pursuit. But it turns out that these card decks were the best sellers of all of their suffrage merchandise. Like, you can actually find suffrage catalogs where you can look through and see how much these items would cost. The deck of cards went for about 25 cents each, and they would be sold in storefronts. So these suffrage organizations had activist shops, much like Human Rights Watch today. So you could go in and buy things, and all the money would go back to the cause. And these votes for women card decks, as I mentioned, were popular, but they're also beautifully designed. So on the backs of the cards, you have the slogan, "Votes for Women," with a depiction of justice, holding this liberty, holding the scales of justice. The cards themselves tend to be like normal, except for the Ace of Spades and the Joker, both of which had pro-suffrage messaging on them. And while these were bestsellers in the 19-teens, they are so hard to find today. It's virtually impossible, with the exception of wonderful eBay, to find a full pack of these for sale. You're lucky if you can just find maybe one or two individual cards. But people actually played with these things, they didn't keep them, they were tossed. So in England, you do have to go back to England to find more creative pursuits. And while the English suffragist movement also created their own card decks, they were also creating card games. And this is Panko, or Votes for Women, the great card game of suffragists versus anti-suffragists. So going head to head, right? So Panko, and again, we're not calling women breadcrumbs. Panko, again, was another abbreviation for the Pankhurst family. And Pinko was a term that was akin to suffragette. So it was common slang in the early 20th century. So we have an advertisement for this game. And this game debuted in 1909, so around the same time as the board game. And this is called A Most Exciting Card Game, an Interesting Memento, which I love because it showed that this was meant to be saved. It was meant to be collected. It wasn't just a game. Intense excitement without the slightest taint of bitterness. And then, your friends are against suffrage, convert them afterwards. Again, it's pure propaganda, right? But I do take issue with the intense excitement without the slightest taint of bitterness, because the anti-suffrage cards are really awful, right? You're throwing women in jail, the police are brutalizing them, and to make it even more bizarre, when you're playing the game, if you're playing as an anti-suffragist, if you have one of these cards, you have to shout, "Jail, jail, jail," or "Help, help, help." So you have to verbalize the actions of the cards, which can be kind of unsettling. But the cards were beautifully designed, again, just like the board game. A lot of thought went into the artistry. They wanted these things to be colorful and coveted. And the designs here, the illustrations were done by a cartoonist who was associated with Punch magazine, the major satirical magazine in England at the time. And just to kind of show you some of the pro cards, You have a lady going, la, la, la. And then the victorious lady with her bagpipes of victory going, toot, 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 votes for women, which was a big deal back then. You would see this lady all over the place. So in addition to these games that had a clear pro-suffrage message, I was also curious to know, how did commercial games manufacturers at the time handle the suffrage question? Did they address it? And it turns out they did. And sometimes the messaging is very clear, other times it's ambivalent. So have any of you ever heard of the game of Snap? Yeah, so like, how do you play Snap?
I don't know.
You don't know, but you've heard of it, right?
I got it in a party favor bag when I was like 6, and we tried to figure it out, and nothing happened.
Oh yeah, like even like reading it today, I'm kind of like the instructions like, this was fun. Why? Well, Snap was a huge, huge game in England. It gained a lot of steam in the late 19th century. And the purpose of the game is that the winner was to have all of the individual cards. So it's basically like a hoarding game. You win if you get all the cards. And if a card that you had was like shown to you, if that was pulled from the deck, you were to yell snap and then grab the card. And I think that one of the reasons why this game was so appealing was because it was all about grotesques. It was all about caricatures. And what you're looking at here is the round card game of Snap, which was made in the early 1900s by the Chad Valley Games Company. And they had a very kind of clear anti-suffrage image here. So one of the grotesques they included was a woman, it says, I want to vote, and she has a hammer because she's about to, break some windows for the cause. But the special edition, it's really weird if you look at some of the other cards too. So we have the suffragette. You have who would be a father. And this is clear anti-suffrage messaging that harkens back to a lot of the postcards that we have. This idea that there's no woman in the picture, and therefore all the parenting has to be done by a man. You have this card here that says hands off Robert, which has like a police officer sexually harassing a woman. But it gets extra weird because she has a frying pan. And a lot of anti-suffrage imagery will have like larger women or masculinized women holding household implements about to beat up men with them. And then you just have up here hot water saucer with a lecherous man and a housemaid, which is very Benny Hill. So some of these cards are just, you don't necessarily know what the meaning of the cards are, but it's very clear that there's some sort of anti-suffrage or anti-woman messaging happening within this game. And this is another example of the Snap card game. I know nothing at all about its manufacturer or like who made it. It's probably from the very early 1900s. It was cheaply produced. It's not elegantly or beautifully designed like we see with the Chad Valley's game. So this was a very, very cheap game. And this is me about to go totally like Pepe Sylvia here. Because as I mentioned, I have been like living and breathing suffrage content for like 2 years. I am the living embodiment of a suffrage X-file. I am seeing the symbols everywhere. I am the alternate history of Twin Peaks: The Return. I'm going down that road, and you're about to witness it. All right, here we go. I think these cards have a coded anti-suffrage message. So the card we have here is of the bride's aunt. It's a spinster image from a game that we have at Hopkins called the Game of the Wedding, where you play various members of the wedding party. Right next to it, we have a spinster who is a suffragette. And again, you have this ungainly pose, masculine attire, awful hat. It's like, the lady desexed, according to Victorian ideals. And then next to it, we have this card from the Snap game, where it says, where are you going, my pretty maid? And a lot of times when showing these images of suffragettes, they were meant to look old, unattractive, and there were often lots of plays upon their age, with these women thinking that they were younger than they were, or willingly wearing, or mocking their alleged virginity. So you see this all the time. So you see this development of a trope, if you will, happening here. And then you have the incorporation of the Bulldog. So the Bulldog in the Victorian and Edwardian era was associated with British masculinity because of the sense of loyalty, the ability to be trained and to obey and to listen, all this stuff. The Bulldog throughout, was a big deal, and the anti-suffragist movement adopted the Bulldog as one of their mascots. Yes. So here we have a postcard that says, "Who said votes for women?" And again, they had great design. I mean, who would want to hang up with a Bulldog and smoke a pipe and wear spectacles? It's really great. But the middle passage here, you see this, it's the section, it's from the Pea Swift game. So you have a Bulldog, beware of the dog. And in the Snap game, you have this image of the Bulldog. And then this happens with cats. With the Snap game, it says, "Oh, you nasty cat." It's an outdoor cat biting the finger of a little boy. In the Victorian and Edwardian era, the cat symbol was very, very complicated. Cats were associated with women. If it was a house cat, it was associated with the concept of the angel in the house, this kind of passive woman, this like pretty kept thing. But if a cat somehow became an outside cat and became feral or acted according to its nature, it became a brutal, assertive woman. And what you see time and time again with anti-suffrage imagery is the incorporation of the angry cat. And here we have a postcard that says, "Votes for she's, the suffragette down with the tomcats." And we may look at that today and think, oh, that's an empowering image. But in the early 1900s, that does not read as such at all. This was a clear-cut anti-suffrage meaning. And then lastly, this would have your police and suffrage. And again, another postcard. Normally, if you would see a woman in this era with a police officer in media, it normally meant that she was engaged in criminal activities. And you see this with the card here. And again, this is me being like conspiracy-minded. When I was looking at this, looking at how she's dressed, in particular, the apron and the fact that she's holding a bowl of food, she looks like a suffragist prisoner. They would often wear these aprons, they wear little caps, and as we know, they go on hunger strike. So I don't know what's exactly happening here, but one reading of it could be she's refusing her food, and the police officer's like, "Get back." So again, this could mean nothing. I could really be going full on Charlie, which is possible. And maybe I should take up bird law, I don't know. But I think that there's something going on with these images because it's not just one thing, it's several, and they are all tied to symbolism and images that were part of the vernacular. People were aware of these things. So move ahead here. So in addition to this card culture and game board culture, we also have lots of interest with octopus toys. And this is where things get kind of mysterious yet again. So it turns out that in the early 20th century, a series of stanhopes, or like miniature, like novelty, microscopic toys were created. They were manufactured in France, but other than that, we know nothing at all about who, what, when, where, or why, really, right? So these stanhopes each feature images of prominent suffragists from England, America, and Canada. So we have the famous Canadian suffragist Flora Drummond, and this is what you'd see inside. I kind of like this because it's like the faces of a suffrage moon or something, kind of going in and out here. And here's another. You can see Susan B. Anthony. So no one has really figured out who commissioned these, like who paid for the construction of these, or where he even purchased them. But we know that there were at least 10 in the series. And people must have bought them because there was a stanhope craze at the time. So it just kind of shows that there's an interest in these types of toys and incorporating suffrage messaging into the fads of the era. And we can't do anything without thinking about the children. And were children being witness to this propaganda? Were things being targeted to that? Here we have a paper down sheet that was created by the McLaughlin Brothers, the prominent American toy company. And they incorporated a suffragette paper doll in one of their sheets. And you might think, oh, wow, that's really cool, right? Votes for women, that's awesome. But on a closer look, you can see that right next to the suffragette outfit is a beautiful, charming, fetching outfit to wear while cleaning the house. So you have one image, one outfit, costume, that's in a sense defying gender norms and the possibilities of what women could do, directly next to the stereotypical image of a woman's place being in the home cleaning. So you can see that it's kind of ambivalent, right? And it's probably because they were making money. They didn't want to lose any of their dollars, right? They didn't want to be controversial. But you also see suffrage being marketed, often in a poor or weird way, through basically early Mad Libs. So this is called Revelations, My Friends. It came out around 1910, and it was sold in both America and England. And the copy that we have here, every single game is filled out. So you have this really interesting microhistory of one group of friends in the 19-teens playing this game. And it's just kind of Mad Libs. They give you the examples of directions. They tell you the types of things you may be asked. And one of the things I love is the pet name category. And because this is from the 19-teens, the pet name is Fluffykins, which I think we can all get behind. So I will mention that there is a suffrage story. I'm going to show it to you. But before then, just some historic context. The term of abuse that is used for this particular game is queer. And at that time, the mainstream use of that word meant someone super sketchy. So just wanted to put that out there. So it's story time. So here's what the template looks like. So you would have this piece of paper with openings, and it would be closed. So you didn't have to open it with a paper cutter after you filled things out. And here's the story. I am an ardent suffragette and have made many eloquent and moving speeches in favor of votes for women. Some time ago, I was speaking at Bathtub and began my remarks by calling the Prime Minister a queer. This met with a mixed reception, so with great diplomacy, I next spoke of him as a honey. My speech was punctuated by a voice from the audience calling out stupid, which somewhat interfered with the thread of my discourse. I spoke earnestly for 76,935 minutes. By that time, the hall was in an uproar. I was knocked down 869 times and then arrested for creating a disturbance. I was sentenced to a fine of $132.02. This is what I looked like on the way to the police station. Signed, me. So this actually becomes really adorable because every single story has someone's self-portrait, and it's really cute. And I incorporated this game into the course I'm teaching, and it turns out that, kids today, right? They're still about SpongeBob, and everyone drew themselves as a SpongeBob character. It was really weird. I don't know if they were trolling me or what. But again, it's fascinating to think that people were playing the same types of games that we play today. And this one book, Revelations, My Friends, you can find out what this one friend group was like, what they thought was funny, how they viewed each other, what they called each other. It's this incredible, highly personal microhistory. And lastly, I just want to show you some super beautiful anti-suffrage propaganda for children. This is a book called Votes for Katherine, Suzanne, and Me. It was created in England. It was written and illustrated by a woman named Kathleen Annesley. And it basically tells the story of anti-suffrage through toys. So you have a bunch of little dolls who are radicalized by militant suffragette dolls. And they do all sorts of bad things, like they fly airplanes that we saw in the game. They're riding around in cars, throwing bombs at places, and they're trying to smash into members of Parliament's home. They eventually get arrested, where they go in their own toy version of a hunger strike, which is basically refusing to eat chocolate. Because clearly, if you're in jail, people offer you chocolate all the time. Take it away, the little dolls exclaim. But then all is well because members from the Home Office save the day. And they tell the little dolls that if they're good and obey their fathers and never ever cause trouble, they'll get out of jail. And guess what? They heartily agreed. What good little ladies they are. What an uplifting story. And again, this makes me so angry, right? Because it's beautiful. The illustrations are beautiful. The printing utilized for this children's book, it's insane. It is gorgeous. It almost looks like it's handwritten. The lettering is exquisite, and yet it has such a terrible message. So there you go, a brief run through of some of the suffrage toys you've been collecting at Hopkins. Do you have any questions or comments or anything?